to another episode of the Reverse Mentor Lab,
where we engage with thinkers from around the world to explore how leaders of today can learn from leaders of tomorrow.
You're back with your hosts. I'm Joshua.
And I'm Jens. Today we are chatting to a young thinker, Lina Safstrom. She illustrates thoughts about the present and the future through a playful, nostalgic manner. Her creation often explores thoughts about reality, uncertainty, and how she deals with it. Hello, Lina. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Great. Great to have you.
Good to be here.
How is the weather in Sweden? Do you have summer today as well, like in Germany?
Yeah, it's finally summer. It's super light as well. I woke up at 5 or something thinking it was afternoon.
Yeah, I'm not missing that part from Sweden, getting up early.
You need good blinds, hey?
Yes.
So I guess I'm the odd one out then, sitting here in South Africa. Thank goodness for Zoom that's connected all of us. And Lina, it's great to have you on another episode of the Reverse Mentor Lab. So super stoked to have you with us today. I'm really looking forward to learning from your smarts and your thinking. And so maybe before we get into the conversation and go down a few rabbit holes, let's tell us a bit about yourself. What makes Lina Lina?
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in the middle of tech, art, and philosophy. That's where I find the most energy and find the most comfort in the big questions and not always having a final answer. I like questions more than answers, I think. And that makes me feel more present and the most like myself. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Curious about life and understanding change and uncertainty and transformation and constantly learning new things about myself and the world.
Yeah, you really have teed up the topic that we've got lined up today in terms of how you've described yourself and also how you sort of tail it off at the end there. And one thing that I'll say before introducing the topic that we're discussing today is that Lina's extremely humble in the way that she describes herself. She's got a phenomenal talent to bring complex ideas into simplicity through using visual forms and also showcasing a variety of different thinking through bringing things into a visual format and really doodling, as many people may know that are listening to inside of that, but it's not just doodling, which we'll look to unpack. But Lina, you touched on it around transformation. And so what we are going to deep dive on today is something called spiral dynamics. And it's actually a concept that you introduced to me a couple of weeks back. And I've gone down many a rabbit hole trying to understand it. So maybe to take that a step further, why and what is spiral dynamics?
Spiral dynamics is a model to understand why change is so hard in the world and how we cannot agree sometimes and how we can have completely different worldviews. So it's a system of values and how both individuals and as a collective, you can see patterns and stages of how you understand the world and how you run and operate in the world. And what I like about it also, that most personality models usually have is they're quite static and they're also looking at it from an individual point of view. And the spiral dynamics have different stages. Yeah, for me, I find comfort in that model because you can see how different values are driven in different stages. That's what I like about it.
Can you give us an example of your life where you can explain that concept?
Yeah, I mean, most of the Western world is blue, the stage where you're very authority driven and order. And as you can tell by my intro, I'm more of an artistic person and I'd like to see things from a more holistic point of view. And I think we are moving towards it as a collective in the West, but we're not really there yet. But you can see the tension, you can see the friction between the different stages in the spiral dynamics in the West, and also that we're moving towards more of ecology and human relations driven values. For example, I'm very inspired by Neri Oxman at MIT. who's looking at things from a more holistic point of view. And I mean, that's what we need to do, because we've been in an industrial linear kind of thinking, and now we're going towards a more circular holistic ecosystem thinking, and going from an ecosystem where the human has been at the very top to an ecosystem where you see yourself in the bigger picture, in the belonging of nature, and that we're not necessarily at the top. And also, I mean, eventually we're also being pushed out from the top by AI as well. So I think we will, as humans, have a collective crisis when we're not at the top anymore, and we'll be the pets of AI, if you could say. But that's going down another rabbit hole.
So a couple of people might see that very, very negative. How do you see it? Is it positive? Is it negative, or neither?
Neither. I'm a metamodernist, so I see nuances, and I would say it's both and. It's just is, if you see it from a mindful meditation way. It just is. But obviously there's going to be friction a lot of the times also, because we run on in different stages, and I wouldn't say any are better than the other. It just is. But I think it's the way. I think now, because of climate crisis and global crisis, we need to collaborate, and that's where we have a lot of struggle. So we also, I want this model to be a way for us to reach out and connect with each other and understand each other better, to see where we're coming from, in order to solve the crisis of today and tomorrow.
Yeah. How did you come across the model itself, and what inspired you to use it for what you're doing?
I don't actually know the whole process of getting into it, but it was through metamodernism. A friend introduced me to metamodernism. This was 3 years ago, I think. And from that, I found this model. And when I find a subject, I just dive straight into it, and I lose time and space. So yeah, that's how I found it. But I do have academic complex, so I haven't studied it like heavily, but I'm very inspired by it.
So that's an interesting thread that I just want to pull on there, Lina, what you just said around you don't have academic complex, but you found and were intrigued by something that you studied. And, as a younger generation, potentially we have access to more resources where we can go and pull on those threads and deep dive into rabbit holes that we haven't necessarily studied before in the formal or traditional sense. So if you take that back and link it to something that you mentioned earlier around going from ego to ecosystems, what do you think we can learn from the phase transition inside of the spiral dynamics model?
Yeah, just be curious about it and study it and see if you can apply it. So I guess this is my own method, but I was trying to identify pop culture references of each stage, where the first stage is very instinct driven. And I was thinking about Taz from Tasmania, the Looney Tunes one. It's very instinct driven. And the next stage is more safety driven and very tribal. And I was thinking about Professor Dumbledore in Harry Potter, for example. And it goes on. And then you have the authority and power and exploitation. I was thinking about Mr. Burns in Simpsons. And then you have like eventually come to the wise turtle in Kung Fu Panda, because it's very holistic and spiritual, and you're part of a bigger universe and in harmony with nature and things like that. So I guess that's my own take of it, to understand it, to be playful. And I guess with the academic complex, it's also like finding my own way, and also questioning like established old ways, because I mean, I respect it a lot, but I also think it's wise to question what has been done before, and see if there's new ways of looking at it to evolve the thinking and match it with today's society.
Yeah, this is, if I take the experienced thinker's role, which I'm supposed to do today, I think it's fascinating, because a lot of people in my age and older, which is plus 40, um, are taking, hey, there's knowledge and there's like what they call proper knowledge, which they learned in university, and that's like the official knowledge, and they're not diving and questioning too much about the other things. So it's like you're exploring a topic rather than studying it. So for me, there's a huge difference in doing it like you do, which I love to explore for myself because I'm not there yet. In hey, let me explore something. For me, it's more, hey, I want to learn it. But I think that's also something experienced thinkers can learn from young thinkers like yourself, which is like, how do you take a topic? How do you question what it means for yourself and then apply it how it fits to you, rather than just taking and applying something?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you see that with other young thinkers do you engage with?
Well, I think definitely with Generation Z, for example, I'm more a millennial slash Generation Z in my thinking. They're very much like DIY, and they're creating what works for them. They're very creative, you could say, or frugal also. And there's a massive time at the moment now with like refurnishing old boats and houses and van life and everything, and questioning also like what works for me. They're grown up. Generation Z have been grown up through crisis, and I think they have been forced to ask the big questions on how they want to live their life and design it the way that they want to live. And I really like that DIY thing. And even like I can just recall the time when I studied at Hyper Island, which is kind of a different school, and just realizing like all the information I want to dive into is accessible and available for me on the internet. So it's very democratic in that way. And I mean, of course, it's an information overload, definitely, and a lot of shit, but if you can find your way through, it's all accessible. Even those stories of a young guy in like a rural town, and he created a robotic arm with pieces of Lego. Like he learned it through YouTube. Or like a javelin winner in the Olympics who had learned javelin throwing through YouTube. I mean, that's a pretty crazy story where you can be very much DIY of your dreams. You don't need to rely on a filter or an authority to certify you necessarily. And also maybe those are outdated and you need new ways. So it's the way of operating with a humble learning feeling of not knowing and being comfortable in the unknown and comfortable exploring and experimenting. I think that is a big key takeout as well.
One of the things I would like to double click a little bit more from a professional perspective. So you have been studying, then worked in different companies, and then you worked in a very large corporation, and then you started like your own business after that. How was that as well, from relearning and rethinking yourself and context in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a ship to turn that takes a lot of unlearning and relearning, definitely. But I'm trying to navigate through. I mean, it sounds very like hippie-ish, but I'm trying to navigate through my my gut feeling and intuition and what's real and authentic to me, instead of being more passive in society or taking the path of least resistance. So that is definitely a relearning and a new way at looking at life and a new way to navigate and operate through life, which I find very, very exciting. And I wonder what the world would look like if people were more true and authentic to themselves, and also taking decisions not based on fear, but taking decisions based out of longing or desire or curiosity. And if people were working with things they really loved and find energy in and lost time and space, I think we will have much more valuable roles and work that would benefit others. I think authenticity is super important. We have so many jobs that are just meaningless that people are doing today that doesn't add any value to the world.
I agree. How did you find yourself, or how did you get into that space where you are from a mindset perspective? Because I think it's very valuable to the experienced thinkers listening, but in the same way for young thinkers who might be stuck in, hey, I just graduated, I need to be in the big company because everyone is expecting me to be there. So how did you get and learn it for yourself?
I think I never really fit into those frames and models. I was definitely a questioner in corporations, and it was appreciated until the work was gonna happen. So I didn't really fit in, and then I thought I'll use this energy somewhere else where I can run with it, because there was a lot of frustration. And in a way, it's like going back to what I enjoyed as a child. So it's like coming back to the child within me. I was always curious. I had those big questions about why about the world since I was like 6 or 7, and been drawing and everything. So it's like going back to the root of my authentic self where I started, and just take away all the questioning and take away all the filtering, you could say. But what worries me with Generation Z is that they think they should fit in and walk this path where I'm like, don't let them tame you. Try to stay true to yourself and not get molded, and be that wild person, because we need dreamers, we need artists, we need doers, we need people to navigate authentically. That's what corporations are looking for now. There was I saw an ad of like an imagination consultant, people to have like imagination, because as you get older, if you work in a more traditional sense, you start to see the limitations, and you become like cynic, or you don't question anymore. It's just how it is. So to stay in that curious, optimistic possibility mindset, you should guard it with your life, and you should take care of it. I see my mind as an Olympic trainer, where I constantly need to reset and filter out all distractions, all notifications. Like, mind your mind with your life. Because having focus and having a free mind is like the best currency you will have from now and moving forward.
So Lina, I love sort of how you ended there around mind your mind. And I think I'm going to come back and circle back to something that you also said around being comfortable with the unknown. And I think when we go through change, when we go through different phases of transition, we look to cling to different things inside of each of those phases. And as a thinker and as a person, it's quite clear that you've become comfortable with who you are as a person and what makes you feel authentic. So if you think through the spiral dynamics model, maybe where do you think we are now? And you touched on it earlier in terms of the Western world, but how do we go about navigating that transition and learning from the phases that have come before where we are at this point?
I think and I hope this last 14 months have helped people stop and reflect and become more comfortable with the unknown. I think we have been quite handicapped or safe in not having adversity and crisis on this scale before. So I think, and I hope this has been a good exercise for what's maybe coming for people to, and I hope people have taken advantage of this situation to learn who they are and where they want to go in life. Because there's only going to be more of this. Yeah, I was going to say something else, but it's so blank now.
It's fine. So double clicking on that. So there's, for me, there are two perspectives. One is like you as an individual, and then there's you in a group of people or as part of the society. What do you see, or is the difference for you on that inside the model?
Yeah, I think the collective is more of the consensus and the norms, but also like the school systems that we have run on a different stage in the spiral dynamics. There can be different schools that has different types. But I think also it's interesting because I think the power is moving towards the east from the west. And what will happen then? Because generally speaking now, of course, in the east, they're in a different stage in the spiral dynamics. So what will happen collectively if the power moves to a different stage in the spiral dynamics? I find that very interesting.
Can you elaborate a little bit for those who are not familiar with the model on where do you see the East right now compared to the West?
I think, as I said before, we have moved more towards human relations and ecology, where the East might be more into the traditional sense, more of like power and structure and hierarchies. I would say definitely hierarchies are a thing. I mean, I have worked in the Middle East, for example, and coming from the Nordic model, I was definitely a questioner there also. And we have a big union movement and a history of being active in the union in Sweden, especially knowing your rights, knowing your workers' rights. So that was definitely a culture clash for me, or a realization that we were in different stages.
So just taking that a step further, Lina, around something that talks to the different work environments that the East and the West are in, but also what you mentioned around the collective, and tying it back to something that you touched on earlier in the conversation was around the shift from a linear to a circular model in the way of thinking. How do we go about identifying with people in this phase of spiral dynamics that we're in to create a bigger shift from linear to circular?
Yeah, that's a good question. Take it again.
So I'll try and use fewer words to talk about it this time, but essentially we all know that we're moving from a linear model to a more circular model in the way that we operate, in the way that we design, the way that we move about in the world. How do we go about enabling and driving that bigger shift as a collective and inspiring the collective as a whole to go through that model shift?
Yeah, I think this, when you're in different phases, and I can recognize that in the past also, if you're more into the ecology system and not the ego system, you are more of a generous collaborator that don't mind failing in front of others, that don't mind status and hierarchies. And if you can move towards that instead of looking at individual gains, working from an isolated view, making career paths that would save you in the system instead of looking what's the best for the company, not operating from a purpose, not taking risks because of your personal gains. If you could move into, and we will have to, definitely, because that's the market demands also, that you are more collaborative. You definitely have to be more collaborative. The most risky thing you could do now is to work in an isolated thing, and you would have to in order to compete with your competitors, and then with collaborating, I also mean collaborating with people outside of your industry. You would work with municipalities and other systems to cling on to them and jack into them to see yourself in a bigger perspective. So you definitely have to collaborate more with people you want to collaborate with, and with people you don't want to collaborate with. You're gonna have to, in order to survive.
So here's a bit of a question to sort of turn this discussion into sort of a bit of a challenge for us all, is saying, we've spoken about sort of phase transitions and different lessons and learnings that we've had in different stages of your life as a person. But how do we think about the spiral dynamics model, and can we go backwards? Because are we always moving forward into different phases, or do you think there are scenarios where you could maybe drift back as society if we don't go back to what you just said about operating in isolation, if we don't break out of that mold?
Yeah, while I was researching spiral dynamics, I saw an example of the US moving backwards a little bit during the first the big terrorist attack, 9/11, moving towards more safety and authority and power and structure, because you're scared, for example. So yeah, I think you can move backwards. I'm not sure you would move all the way back to instinct unless we have a massive comet coming our way or something. Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure you can dip your toe in each stage throughout. Yeah.
I was about to say, I guess it's a little bit fluid as well, depending on what's happened. It's like you mentioned already, the pandemic has moved us into certain directions, which we would maybe without the pandemic not move. So things get faster, but other things get slower. And that's I guess as well one of the fascinating perspectives. If you use a model, it's not always 100% true. It's more understanding and seeing the nuances and using the nuances in different ways is the interesting part. Like you said, exploring what it is and what it means for yourself. And that's then the same from a business context.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't just blindly look at the spiral dynamics, more see it as some reference points. But because there's so many things going on at the same time, we're moving towards more of ecology, but at the same time, we're moving towards more instinct and safety at the same time.
So if we just sort of explore what we mean by instinct and safety, and we go back to something that you mentioned around pop culture, and how do you think culture impacts the way that we look at things?
Yeah, I find culture very comforting when we're talking about understanding the world and our time. Even just looking at old documentaries about paintings, I realized it's not necessarily the painting, but it's the time and era of that artist, where the artist painted it, and cultural history. I think it's super interesting at what point different artworks have explored and expanded and things like that. And currently there's an exhibition here in Malmö, Sweden, about an artist who was active 100 years ago. And she was so before her time because she was meditating, and she was part of a women's group, and she was looking at ecology. And you look at these paintings now, and they're almost prophetic, like a prophecy. And the fascinating part is the story around culture. So I see art as a timepiece of human understanding, which I find interesting, and also super curious about NFTs now. Also, the digital equivalent of a physical auction house.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Lina. Yeah, just quickly what you mentioned then. I'm not going to take us down this rabbit hole because I know that I'm conscious of time and you've been very generous with your thinking that you've shared so far. But just what you mentioned there around art, and for those listening, they might be familiar with CryptoPunks. And the value of a CryptoPunk is extraordinary. But also, if you just go and look at the nuances and how they were actually designed, many of the CryptoPunks actually have masks on them. And by that, I mean face masks. And what just made me think of that was how you referenced that prophecy around an artist being maybe too early or not understood for their time. And it's extremely fascinating when you start thinking about all of the different touch pieces inside of the broader ecosystem, which need to be understood or connected to derive meaning or value from what is put in front of them.
So getting slowly into the last part, we always set out and give the opportunity for our guests to put out a challenge. So what is the one thing you would like the listeners to take away and push into the world?
I think it's a question of personal development or self-awareness. And I would like to challenge people to think and reflect on who are you in change and uncertainty, but also who do you want to be in change and uncertainty? Because we only navigate from ourselves, and you can't change what you don't understand. And also not seeing, like, also rethinking the concept of change and uncertainty, because it doesn't, what if we can move towards fascination of it rather than fear? Because fear is not necessarily productive. Initially it's a wake-up call, but in order to solve the world's most pressing challenges, I think we have to meet uncertainty with fascination.
Love that. Specifically, the going a little bit deeper is like the who are you and who do you want to be? And that sounds a little bit egoistic, but I think that's a space where you need to get in to be comfortable with yourself, to then look into how can I do something in the world that changes something bigger. But if you're not true to yourself, to your personal values and where you want to be and who you want to be specifically, you're not able to give as much. And that's what a lot of people are not, at least from an experienced thinker perspective, don't understand, because it's way more common for experienced thinkers, and that's touching back to the early part of the conversation, to cater everything to the opinions of others rather than to yourself. And not in the way that you should be egoistic in everything you do, but it's more about, hey, if you're getting zero energy out of something, why are you doing it? Just to please someone else? Is that the right thing to do? Question mark.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you work on your mental hinders, old destructive patterns, for example, you can be more generous because you're not being triggered the whole time, and use energy to protect yourself the whole time, because the world isn't, once you come out the other side, the world isn't dangerous and you're not being threatened. It's actually very generous. I found this quote really lovely as well. It's like, it's not about finding love, it's about allowing love. Now I'm being the hippie again, but I think we can use that energy. If you can be more authentic, you can use that energy to more productive things than worrying and being scared of life.
Yeah, well, Lina, I've already taken a huge amount of notes and the number of topics that we are going to have you back on, if you'll be so kind to give us some more of your time just to double click and explore some of the concepts that you've teased out in today's discussion and conversation. So yeah, from my side, I really enjoyed the conversation, learned a hell of a lot from you as always when we spent time together. And Jens, thank you for your time, and yeah, looking forward to hopefully having you back sometime in the future for another episode of the Reverse Mental Lab. And yeah, keep being you, keep being authentic, and keep giving, because your ideas and concepts that you're bringing into the world are quite remarkable, and looking forward to following your journey.
Thanks,
thank
Lina.
you so much. It was very nice to hear and lovely to speak to you as always. It's been pleasurable.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening and joining us on the journey that is the Reverse Mental Lab. If anything fascinated you in the discussion that we had today, you're welcome to set up a 15-minute coffee chat with us. Our emails are in the show notes, and you can also connect with us on our website, thexyzplayground.com.